Some of you wanted to know about like the link between fasting and like better mental clarity.
Hmm.
And we found some really interesting research for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Um, we're taking a close look at an excerpt from this academic paper. And it's called like the scientifically proven positive effects of fasting on mental health and its integration with Islamic teachings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it seems like fasting might not just be about, feeling lighter, but also about like actually boosting your brain power.
Yeah, fasting has been practiced, for centuries, and like often it's been intertwined with spiritual traditions. But what's really cool is that like modern science is starting to kind of validate some of the mental benefits that people have been talking about for a long time.
Right. Yeah, it's not just anecdotal.
Exactly.
So let's jump into like the sciencey stuff first.
Okay.
This paper says that like fasting can actually like stimulate the growth of new brain cells.
Wow.
I always thought that like neurogenesis, like that process of like making new brain cells like stopped after a certain age.
Yeah, that's a pretty common misconception. While it's true that neurogenesis does slow down, it doesn't totally stop. And what's really interesting is that fasting seems to like kind of rev up this process.
Right.
The paper talks about the study in the Journal of Neuroscience where they found that like intermittent fasting, that thing where you cycle between periods of eating and not eating,
Yeah.
they found that it was actually linked to like increased neurogenesis.
So how does that actually work? Like what's going on in the brain?
So basically, during fasting, the brain releases certain growth factors, and these are like proteins that stimulate the production of new brain cells.
Okay.
One of these is called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BDNF.
Yeah, exactly. You can think of it like fertilizer for your brain.
Okay.
It helps those neurons grow and connect. And what's super exciting is that this increase in BDNF and neurogenesis could actually make the brain more like resilient to those neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like giving your brain like a tune-up.
Yeah, like a little brain boost.
Yeah. But what about all that stress we face every single day? Does fasting have any impact on like how we handle it?
Absolutely. So remember cortisol, like that stress hormone that floods your system when you're feeling overwhelmed?
Oh, yeah.
Studies in psychoneuroendocrinology show that fasting can actually help lower those cortisol levels, so you might end up feeling calmer and more balanced emotionally.
So less of that like fight or flight feeling.
Exactly.
But how does fasting actually lead to like a calmer response to stress?
So when you fast, your body kind of goes through this series of adaptations.
Okay.
And one of these involves like improving the way your body regulates hormones, including that cortisol. It's not about like eliminating stress entirely, but it's about equipping your body with better tools to deal with stressful situations.
Right. So it's not like stress just disappears.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got the potential for new brain cells and like better stress management.
Right.
Now I'm curious about like the impact on mood. Does fasting affect those feel-good chemicals in our brains like dopamine and serotonin?
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting. Studies in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found a link between intermittent fasting and like fewer mood swings and greater emotional stability.
Mm.
It seems like fasting could help regulate the production and balance of these neurochemicals, and that might lead to feeling more emotionally even keeled.
So fewer mood swings and a greater sense of balance. I like it.
Right.
But I have to ask, are there any downsides? Does fasting like affect energy levels and focus? I'd be worried about feeling like foggy or sluggish,
Yeah.
especially while working.
That's a valid concern, but surprisingly, the research suggests the opposite.
Oh, really?
When you fast, your body goes into this metabolic state called ketosis.
Ketosis.
Yeah, it basically shifts from using glucose from carbs as its main fuel source to using ketone bodies, which come from fat.
So my brain is running on a different type of fuel.
Exactly.
Okay, how does that impact focus and mental clarity?
You can think of ketone bodies like a super efficient energy source for your brain. Research in Nature Reviews Neuroscience suggests that this shift to ketone bodies can actually make you feel sharper and more alert. Some researchers even think that this could be a protective mechanism to help the brain function even when it's deprived of its usual fuel source.
So instead of feeling drained, I might actually feel more energized and focused.
Exactly.
It's pretty cool.
That's fascinating. But is everyone's experience with fasting the same? I imagine some people might find it difficult to adjust.
Yeah, you're right to question. Everyone's body is different, so their responses to fasting can vary. Some people might feel amazing, while others might experience some initial discomfort as their body adjusts.
Right.
It's super important to listen to your body and find what works best for you.
That's good advice. It sounds like fasting could offer some pretty powerful benefits for our brains. Potentially boosting brain power, enhancing focus, and even helping us manage stress more effectively.
It's really exciting to see how scientific research is starting to uncover all the complex mechanisms at play.
And what's particularly interesting is how these findings kind of intersect with ancient wisdom and practices, especially in spiritual traditions like Islam.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and explore that connection. This paper highlights the spiritual dimension of fasting, especially within Islam.
Right. The paper actually quotes the Quran, which states, "O you who have believed, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, that you may attain self-restraint." That's from Quran 2.183.
So it's not just about like abstaining from food and drink, but about like cultivating self-control and mindfulness.
Exactly. It's about recognizing and managing our desires, developing a deeper awareness of our physical and emotional needs.
That reminds me of like modern psychological techniques like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or MBCT, which also emphasize self-awareness and emotional regulation. Could you maybe explain the link between these modern approaches and the spiritual practice of fasting?
Sure, both MBCT and fasting kind of share this common thread. They encourage us to step back from our immediate impulses and work on our self-control. In MBCT, we practice observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment, and in fasting, we practice abstaining from things we typically indulge in, to gain control over our desires.
So it's almost like training your mind and body to be more resilient and less reactive.
Right.
But Islamic fasting goes beyond individual self-discipline.
Yes.
It also has like a strong communal aspect, right?
Absolutely. Think of Ramadan, that month of fasting observed by Muslims worldwide. It's a time for spiritual reflection, increased prayer, and acts of charity. But it's also a time for communities to come together to share meals and support each other.
Right.
This social connection plays a huge role in mental well-being.
It makes me think about research in social psychological and personality science that shows how social bonding can actually reduce loneliness and boost mental health. It seems like the communal aspect of Ramadan fits in perfectly with that.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that we're social creatures and our well-being is tied to our relationships and sense of belonging.
And it's not just about socializing. Ramadan also emphasizes gratitude, especially for the simple act of eating and drinking. Could you talk about how this focus on gratitude might benefit mental health?
So when you fast, you become super aware of the things we often take for granted. This heightened awareness can cultivate a deeper appreciation for everyday blessings. Psychological studies have shown that practicing gratitude can have a huge impact on our emotional well-being and overall life satisfaction.
It's like shifting your perspective from scarcity to abundance,
Yeah,
recognizing the richness that already exists in your life.
exactly.
But it's not just gratitude for food, right? Islamic fasting also encourages increased prayer reflection and acts of charity, all of which could contribute to a sense of inner peace and purpose.
You're absolutely right. The spiritual practices associated with Islamic fasting can provide a sense of grounding and connection to something greater than yourself, fostering inner peace and resilience.
This is so fascinating. It seems like Islamic fasting aligns with many of the principles of positive psychology, promoting gratitude, social connection, and a sense of meaning and purpose.
What's truly remarkable is how this ancient practice seems to harmonize with modern scientific findings. It suggests a holistic approach to well-being that encompasses the mind, body, and spirit.
It's like science is catching up to what spiritual traditions have known for centuries.
Yeah.
This deep dive is giving me a whole new perspective on something I thought I already knew quite a bit about.
That's the beauty of exploration and continued learning. There's always more to discover, more connections to make, and more to understand about ourselves and the world.
I totally agree. We've covered so much ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored the potential for fasting to boost brain power, enhance focus, and even foster greater emotional resilience. But this is just the beginning.
We've only just scratched the surface. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the potential for fasting to cultivate a more resilient and focused mind, especially in our increasingly chaotic world. Stay tuned for more.
It's like amazing to think that something as old as fasting could have so much potential for our lives today. But let's get like more specific. You mentioned that fasting could be like a key to unlocking a more resilient and focused mind, especially in like our crazy world these days. What did you mean by that?
Well, we live in a world of constant stimulation. Our phones are always buzzing, we're getting notifications all the time, and there's this never-ending stream of information that's like fighting for our attention. It's no wonder that our attention spans are getting shorter, and it's harder and harder to really focus.
Yeah, it's so true. I can barely read an article online without getting distracted by something else.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, fasting could help us regain some control over our attention?
There's a growing amount of research that suggests that fasting, especially when it's combined with that mindful awareness you get through practices like Islamic fasting, could really help strengthen our mental discipline.
Hmm, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about this connection between fasting and, like, mental discipline?
Well, fasting isn't always easy. It takes willpower
Hmm.
and the ability to delay gratification. When you choose to abstain from food and drink, you're basically exercising your mental muscle. You're strengthening your ability to resist impulses and stay focused on your goals.
So it's not just about being more mindful about what we eat, but about how we, like, think and react to the world around us.
Exactly. By practicing self-control in one area of our lives, we can potentially develop greater self-mastery in other areas as well. It's like building resilience, not just to hunger pangs, but to all those distractions and temptations that surround us.
This makes me think about all the emphasis on patience and perseverance in Islamic teachings. Could you talk about how those values connect to the mental discipline we're talking about?
In Islam, fasting is seen as a form of worship, a way to get closer to God and cultivate spiritual strength. It's about developing patience enduring hardship and recognizing that true satisfaction doesn't come from instant gratification, but from aligning yourself with a higher purpose.
It sounds like fasting in this context is about so much more than just physical deprivation. It's about training the mind and spirit to be more resilient, focused, and aligned with your values.
Precisely. And this focus on the spiritual dimension of fasting is especially relevant today. As we become more and more reliant on technology and external stimulation, we might be losing touch with our inner world, our ability to be introspective and find stillness.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in all the noise and demands of daily life that we forget to slow down, reflect, and connect with ourselves on a deeper level.
And that's where fasting, especially within a spiritual framework like Islam, could be transformative. By creating space for stillness and introspection, fasting allows us to reconnect with our inner wisdom, to figure out what really matters, and to cultivate a sense of peace that goes beyond all the chaos of the external world.
So it's like hitting the pause button on all that information and stimulation, allowing ourselves to just be present and connect with our inner selves.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from the external to the internal, recognizing that true strength and resilience come from within. And this inner strength isn't just about willpower, it's also about cultivating gratitude, purpose, and connection to something bigger than ourselves.
This reminds me of our earlier conversation about the focus on gratitude and social connection in Islamic fasting. Can you talk more about how those aspects contribute to developing a more resilient mind?
Gratitude helps us shift our perspective from what we're lacking to what we already have. It helps us feel content and appreciate the simple things in life. This shift in perspective can be really powerful in building resilience. It helps us face challenges with a more positive outlook, and social connection, like we talked about before, reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles. It gives us a sense of belonging and support, which can be so important during tough times.
So it's like a holistic approach to building resilience.
Mhm.
It's not just about willpower or mental toughness. It's about cultivating gratitude, connection, and purpose. It sounds like fasting, especially in a spiritual context, could be a powerful tool for dealing with the challenges of modern life.
It's about recognizing that true strength doesn't come from isolating ourselves, but from connecting with our inner selves, with other people, and with something greater than ourselves.
This deep dive is really challenging my assumptions about fasting.
Mhm.
I used to think it was mostly about physical health, but now I'm seeing that the mental and spiritual benefits could be even more significant.
And those benefits might be especially valuable now when anxiety, distraction, and disconnection seem to be increasing. Perhaps fasting, with its emphasis on self-control, mindfulness, and spiritual connection, could offer a path to greater peace, resilience, and fulfillment.
That's a really interesting thought, and it makes me wonder if fasting could help us regain our attention and find stillness in the middle of all this chaos. What other possibilities might it unlock? Could it help us be more creative, better problem solvers, or even more empathetic?
Those are really great questions, and they highlight why we need more research to explore all the potential benefits of fasting. What we do know is that fasting, when it's done intentionally and with awareness, can transform our relationship with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
hmm
could you summarize some of the key things we've learned about how fasting can help us develop a more resilient and focused mind?
Sure, we've explored how fasting can strengthen our mental discipline, making us better at resisting distractions and making conscious choices. We talked about how it can create space for stillness and introspection, allowing us to reconnect with our inner wisdom and find peace in the midst of the chaos of modern life. And we've highlighted the importance of gratitude, social connection, and purpose in building resilience, all of which can be fostered through fasting, especially within a spiritual context.
These are such powerful insights, and they make a really strong argument for exploring fasting, not just for our physical health, but for our mental and spiritual well-being, too.
Absolutely. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some practical tips for incorporating fasting into your life and share some final thoughts on how this ancient practice might hold the key to a more resilient, focused, and fulfilling future.
Wow, this deep dive has given me like so much to think about.
Mm.
You've really shown how fasting can be this powerful tool for building a stronger and more focused mind.
Yeah, it's been great exploring these ideas with you.
So for our listeners who are now like really intrigued by fasting, what advice would you give them? Like where should they even start?
I think it's really important to approach fasting with intention and like respect for your body. It's not a one size fits all thing,
Hmm.
and you really need to listen to your body's signals.
So it's not just about like jumping into the most extreme type of fast right away.
Exactly. There are different ways to incorporate fasting into your life, like intermittent fasting, for example, which involves cycling between periods of eating and not eating. That's a popular method, and it's often easier for beginners.
Can you give us an example of what like an intermittent fasting schedule might look like?
Sure, one common method is the 168 method, where you fast for 16 hours and then you have an 8-hour window for eating. Some people also like alternate day fasting, where they fast every other day.
It seems like there's a lot of flexibility in how you can approach it.
Yeah, the key is to find what works best for you and your lifestyle. And of course, it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor before making any big changes to your diet, especially if you have any health conditions.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Safety first now, aside from all the practical stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to emphasize as we wrap up our deep dive?
I think it's important for listeners to see fasting as more than just a physical practice. It's a chance for growth and self-discovery.
Can you say more about that?
Fasting can be like a journey inward, a chance to become more self-aware, to strengthen your connection with your values, and to really appreciate the simple things in your life.
So it's not just about the food.
Right, it's about recognizing that our mind, body, and spirit are all connected and using fasting to nourish all three.
This has been such an insightful conversation as we finish up our deep dive into fasting and mental clarity.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I would say this. In a world that often feels so overwhelming and chaotic, fasting offers a path to greater resilience, focus, and inner peace. It's an invitation to slow down, listen to your body, and reconnect with your inner strength.
That's beautifully said. And who knows, maybe this deep dive is just the beginning of a much longer journey of exploration for our listeners.
I hope so. The world of knowledge is vast and always growing. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and embrace the power of learning.
Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the world of fasting and mental clarity. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and keep that curiosity alive.